Welcome to part 2 of our constitutional concepts. So let's talk about separation of powers. Just from its very title, you know that powers are going to be kept separate. So these are the different functions to the distinct but different branches. As you know, we have 3 branches, and each one of them has their own jobs. All right, so the first one, the judicial branch, let's talk about. First of all, this was put together in Article 3 of the Constitution. Secondly, this is going to judge or interpret the laws. All right, and on the federal level, we're talking about the Supreme Court here. We're also talking about all the federal other levels of courts, but for your purposes, the Supreme Court. All right, legislative branch. This is Article 1 of the Constitution. So they did that first. Doesn't mean it's more important necessarily. It just means that they were focused on that because they were fearful of a strong executive. And this is the legislative branch makes the laws. And on the federal level or on the national level, we're talking about Congress. All right, and then lastly, but not any less important, is the executive branch. And the executive branch is going to be Article 2 of the Constitution. And on the national level, it's going to be the president. And they are going to enforce the laws. And one way that you can maybe remember that is that enforce and executive both start with E. Okay, so let's move down here. All right, so each branch has its own office holders who are selected in a variety of ways and who serve different terms of office. And a term just means the length of time between elections. All right, so representatives, so they go to the House of Representatives. They are on 2-year terms. So they're up for re-election every 2 years. So the election that's coming up November 4th of 2014 would be a midterm election. It's in the middle of a presidential election, and that is an election for the House of Representatives, everybody. Senators are 6-year terms, but a third of them are up for re-election every 2 years. So in 2014, all of the House of Representatives is up for re-election and a third of the Senate. All right, and then the president is a 4-year term, but he actually has term limits. So he can serve 2 terms or 10 years. And how does that work? Well, it works that if he was or she was vice president and the president under which they were serving died and they had 2 years or less in their term, they could serve that out and then be elected twice more. And we have that thanks to the 22nd Amendment, which was a result of the fact that FDR had been elected 4 times. Now, Supreme Court justices serve for life. They can be impeached by the Senate, but for the most part, they serve for life. All right, so let's look at the national and New York State branches. The national government capital is located. Do you remember where that is? Hopefully you said Washington, D.C. That stands for the District of Columbia. It's not a state, remember. State capital of our state is Albany. Now, on the executive level, and on the national government, we have the president. On the state level, we have the governor. Make sure you spell that right. On the national level, in the legislative branch, we have the Congress. Remember, that is a bicameral legislature, 2 houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate. And on the state level, it's called the legislature. It's not called that in every state, but in our state it is. And then the highest court on the national level is the U.S. Supreme Court. And on the state level is New York State Supreme Court. Now, it's not called that in every state, but it just so happens to be called that in our state. Okay, so let's see what you know. Do you know the name of the President of the United States? That's his picture right here on the left. And then do you know who this is on the right? On the left, we have President Barack Obama, and on the right, we have Vice President Joe Biden. So let's fill that in. So our president is Barack Obama. Our vice president is Joe Biden. Do you know if they're Democrats or Republicans? They're Democrats. Hopefully you guessed that. All right, so our U.S. senators from the state of New York, which means that they represent New York, but they go to Washington, D.C. for their job. We have two of them. They both happen to be Democrats. We have Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand. So let's write those down. We have Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand. And they are both Democrats as well. Our U.S. representatives, we used to have two, but now we only have one. And his, right here, this is our congressional district, the 22nd district. And we are represented by this gentleman, and his name is Richard Hanna. So let's write that down. And he is a Republican. All right, so let's look at the state level. So our governor, this is our governor, his name is Andrew Cuomo. Oh, sorry, yeah, Andrew Cuomo. His dad, Mario, was a governor from the state of New York as well. Andrew is a Democrat. And then our state senator, right here, Tom Libbis. And he is a Republican. Now, we have two state assembly people, depending on where you live. So if you live in Maine or in York Valley, then your representative is going to be Christopher Friend. So you would write that down, and he's a Republican. Now, if you live in Endwell or Town of Union anywhere, Johnson City, Vestal, that type of thing, then you are in Donna Lopardo, in her district, and she is a Democrat, so you would write that down for your representative. So depending on where you live, either here you have Donna Lopardo, who's a Democrat, or if you live in the 124th district, then it's going to be Chris Friend, who is a Republican. All right. So back to this. And then our county executive, her name is Debbie Preston. She is a Republican. And this is her picture. And then lastly, but not least, Town of Union Supervisor, and her name is Rose Sotak. And she is also a Republican. Okay, all right, nice work on that. So let's go to the next page, which I think is this page with checks and balances. All right, so each branch has powers to ensure that the other branches will not illegally usurp, okay? And you know what usurp means? Take away their powers. All right, so this would be helpful if you had a highlighter right now, but if you don't, you can definitely just underline. Okay, so we have the legislative branch, we have the executive branch, and we have the judicial branch. All right, so the legislative branch we know is made up of Congress, House of Representatives, and the Senate. And the arrows, so for an example, if I'm going left to right, if you'll notice this arrow right here, okay, that's how the legislative branch checks the executive branch. So they can approve presidential nominations, control the budget, pass laws over the president's veto, and can impeach the president. So if the president vetoes a bill, which means he doesn't want it to go into effect, they can override it. It's very difficult to do that these days because Congress is so divided, but they could do that. They can also impeach the president. We've had two presidents impeached. Do you know who they are? hopefully you said Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton. Richard Nixon was not impeached, although a lot of people feel like he was impeached. He resigned right before articles of impeachment were brought against him. And impeachment is a two-step process. The House impeaches, brings articles of impeachment, which means they are the ones that are deciding if he's guilty of whatever he's charged. And then the Senate votes to remove. And neither one of our presidents were removed from office that were impeached. All right, so let's go the other way now. How can the executive branch check the legislative branch? Well, he can veto congressional legislation. There's a lot of other things that he can do, so I don't want you to think he's less powerful, but just for our purposes, that's what you need to know. All right, so now let's talk about the legislative branch checking the judicial branch. The Senate confirms the president's nomination, so the president will nominate somebody for the Supreme Court, and then the Senate has to approve or not approve. And if they approve, then that's called the confirmation hearing, and they confirm, and that person can go to the Supreme Court. If they don't, then the president has to try to find somebody else. And then Congress can impeach judges and remove them from office. That happens very, very rarely. All right, let's go the other way now. How can the court check the legislative branch? Well, this is basically their big job. They can declare laws unconstitutional, and it happens pretty much on a regular basis. All right, let's go from executive branch to judicial branch. The president nominates judges, which I was just talking to you about. And then if we go this way, all right, the judicial branch can declare presidential acts unconstitutional. That happens every so often, not as often as declaring laws unconstitutional, but it does happen. All right, nice job.